On this AVNation special, we chat with Modus VR and Avacor, talking about how virtual reality can help folks get back to work and develop hybrid spaces. All that and more next on this AVNation special.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is an AVNation special, Commercial VR. Step to Marbury with AVNation with an AVNation special, taking a look at an interesting take on getting back to work. We're recording this towards the first part of July. Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, all the big ones, right? They've all said, you know what, we're going back to work. We're going back in person. There are different companies have different levels, different strategies, different timelines. But by and large, there is going to be some sort of in-person component to the big tech companies. In addition, you've got other folks that are saying, you know what, let's do hybrid. You can do, some sort of hoteling when you do happen to come into the office. And then there are other companies that said, you know what, we get it. We want to do 100% remote. We sell all of our properties or break all of our leases, and we don't have any brick and mortar anymore. Depending on your company, depending on your culture, that's what you're going to kind of focus on. With me today to talk about this are two gentlemen I didn't think I would ever have on the same program. I've interviewed them separately, and this is a very, very interesting one. So first of all, foremost, Dana Corey, you guys know him and love him from Avacor. Welcome, sir.
Welcome. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And a young man, I have, there's two parts of this. First of all, I met Ken Bruick from Modus through the work we do with Cedia and the residential market, right? And Ken's got the Modus is an opportunity to create VR and basically 3D renderings of home installations. On the CTI side, we were actually looking at the system and still are doing some commercial type VR. So Ken, first and foremost, welcome back, sir.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So let's talk for a second, really quick, Ken. You have migrated over from doing primarily residential, right? That was the stuff that you had in your toolbox, and you have migrated over and you started adding things like Avacor properties into the Modus platform. First, let's talk for a second about why you even started making that transition.
Yeah, and so Modus has always been a space planning and problem-solving tool. We needed to start small just to be able to execute and deliver something, and we had a lot of ties in the residential market, so that's where we chose to start. And as we were looking for areas to expand, we had a lot of customers that were doing stuff on the commercial side too, and so they just kind of naturally pulled us in. And the more we looked at commercial, the more we realized we could offer a lot of value there. So it was a natural place for us to expand.
One of those aspects is, and it's something that I have had somewhat, not disagreements like, fisticuffs, but disagreements with the Cedia folks when they say, oh, you know what, our members don't do residential commercial, or they don't do light commercial very often. They may not be talking to the same people I am, right? And that's possible.
Yeah.
You just mentioned something there. Your customers were getting into commercial. Mm-hmm. The people that I'm talking to are getting into commercial, right? I'll pick on my buddy Joe Whitaker here from St. Louis. Thoughtful Integrations, he started out in doing homes in Dallas and here in St. Louis, some high-end stuff. And now he's doing not just that, but also a number of hospitality and other types of light commercial. Talk for a second about that transition that you've been able to see from, oh yeah, we can do high-end homes, but now we can also do some of these commercial products.
Yeah, it's interesting because the commercial process is radically different, right? When you're dealing with a homeowner, it's much more an emotional sell. It's often higher margin, higher touch. Everything is very bespoke. On the commercial side, it's just a totally different discipline. The margins are tighter. Your precision has to be greater. You're dealing with people that aren't making emotional decisions. You're dealing with someone that has a fixed budget. They can't just say, well, now that you've got me thinking about this fun presentation, I'm going to add another $5,000 to the budget. It's a very different thing. And so it's not always a logical or natural transition for the integrator. But it is pretty common for some of those larger integrators to open up a separate division that can function differently. And we do see a lot of that. And then on the CDS side, I mean, they have been talking a lot about resi-commercial. That, from what we've seen, that's typically more like bars and restaurants rather than conference rooms. But also, there's a lot of hospitality in there too. It's just interesting to see. I think overall, when I compare our commercial-only integrators to our residential-only integrators, the commercial integrators seem to have a lot more unification in the types of jobs they do, whereas on the residential side, we see a lot more variety.
Yeah. Dana, I'm going to bring you in on this. As we do kind of get back to work, one of the things that Avocor does a lot of when it comes to interactive displays as well as large format displays, you have a lot of partners that you've integrated with when it comes to Avocor. People like Microsoft and Zoom and Crestron and stuff like that. So you are 100%, baked in commercial, right? Yeah. As we look at this getting back to work, and regardless of which one we're looking at here, what do you see as we start looking at getting people back in person, but also being able to having that need to connect folks at a far end, whether that's a client or whether that's a coworker?
Yeah, I think as we talked about before, we have in the industry, the proliferation of video now being everywhere. Zoom is now a verb, right? In the sense that it's all widely known from kids to adults, obviously, and now you get on a call these days, and if you're not on video, it's almost like it feels weird, right? I'd rather be on a video call than be on my cell phone, honestly, after this time. And that's a journey that this industry would have taken us probably 5 years to accomplish or more. We've been trying to, get audio in meeting rooms and get video in meeting rooms, and now we're going to have, video everywhere. So that's been good for us in some way because now video is the standard. And I think what we're now seeing is a race to get video into meeting rooms. And then the other challenge, of course, which we'll talk about is, creating equity across the employees, whether they be in office, either for the day or for a meeting or at home. How do we create that equity across both of them so I can feel like I'm included as part of the team? So I can meet the needs of my employees and their needs as a family, but also deliver on productivity in the company. That balance will be, as we were talking about, and Ken mentioned earlier, it's really what's the best fit for each one of those companies. But that's the challenge for sure. And Avocor's play is to be that surface, if you will, that platform to spring off of, to enable that collaboration, to enable whatever that is, whether it's a light lift of annotating to full-on collaborating. But the answer is always the same for us. It's no problem. We can do it, right?
Ken, I want to bring you in on this because you have an interesting story that I want to tie back into something that Avocor and Dana can do. Your previous company, the company that you had before this, you guys were purchased by another firm. You were the only person that was not physically in that meeting, and some a term that folks will throw around here is meeting equity, right? Making sure that everybody feels a part of the meeting, everybody's able to contribute and get something out of it. Tell folks for a minute here that your experience as being the only kind of remote person. Again, this was years ago, right? So technology has certainly jumped forward since then. But that just from your perspective, that experience.
Yeah, this is around 2013, 2014. We had a very small team of 12 or 13 people at the time. We were brought into a much, much larger company. I'm in Utah. Headquarters, or at least for my division, was in California. And it was a very meeting-heavy culture that this company had. But we're also a software team. And so much of our time was spent in front of whiteboards, sketching out architecture and brainstorming ideas. And what would happen is I'd be dialed into these meetings, and for me, it was not an equitable experience. I couldn't see the whiteboard. It was in view of the camera. I mean, physically, I could see a white rectangle, but once they started drawing, I couldn't see a thing, right? The resolution was too low, the video compression was too high, so I could just see kind of blurs of colors. The conference room setup itself was so poor that I couldn't even hear what was being discussed. And a lot of times those meetings have little side chats here and there. Mm-hmm. And for me to contribute in any meaningful way or even get anything out of the meeting was nearly impossible. And the takeaways I had from that were largely negative. every meeting we had was dreadful. I was discouraged, certainly not motivated, certainly not energized or excited about the direction things were headed, largely because I didn't know what was happening or where they were headed. And coming out of that, I started to think, okay, well, maybe hybrid work just isn't possible.
Yeah.
But that's really not the case at all, right? It was a technology problem where they just didn't have the right tools. And so because of that, I wasn't really part of the team. I didn't get an equitable side. Thankfully, things are now changing.
Yeah, Dana, take us from 8 years ago now. Take us forward. You mentioned the fact that in the last year, obviously, technology has taken a leapfrog, and I would also argue that adoption of technology has also taken a leapfrog because of the pandemic. How can technology solve some of these issues? Right, technology is going to catch all for everything, but this is certainly one of those areas where there are technological solutions to the experience that Ken had.
Yeah, I think there's still challenges ahead of us. And that while the platforms of Teams and Google Meet and Zoom have brought forward a much better delivery platform to kind of spring off of and do collaboration, maybe some whiteboarding, some content share that's there. And now we're challenged with, well, which one do I pick and how do I handle all those? And what if my customer uses one and I use another? That's the challenge to be. But when it comes to having this level of interaction, the tools are there now. From a hardware perspective, we've been ahead of both on cameras and touch technology ahead of the applications for a while. We kind of build the Bentley, if you will, of what's available and hoping that you get there and the driver can keep up with us, right? So this adoption, this video enablement is getting us closer to parity together, where you're using the real benefits of that hardware in day to day. And I think we're going to see continued race, if you will, innovation in the meeting room, because now if I am Teams or Meet or Zoom and I'm fighting for users and applications, and now if we're going back to work, guess what the fight is? The fight's in the room. And I mean that in a positive way, meaning fighting for innovation and new things. So I believe, and I have no foresight into this other than the fact that I believe that we're going to see some real benefits in the meeting rooms from those platforms. We saw Microsoft do it recently on another advancement of their whiteboarding, which is incredible. I'm sure Zoom's working on something as well like that. All that means for us is that the benefits continue to drive into the room environments, whether in a room at home, office at home, or an executive office or in a meeting room. It's coming, and we're ready for it. I think really are.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's going to be some of the stuff that we kind of move on as we further this conversation. Ken, I want to talk about something that Dana mentioned, the fact that bringing things and the challenge is going to be and the battle will be technology wise in the boardroom and in the meeting room, but sometimes that meeting room is kind of virtual, right? You do have some folks and who are all remote, and then you have obviously you have the hybrid, and then you've got the all in person, but that process and those experiences have got to be somewhat of seamless. One of the things in reading, I want to say it was a psychology piece about a week or so ago. One of the things that folks are pointing to is, as we kind of get back in person, one of the things that folks discovered in the last year was you can still have human interaction. It's not physically, not necessarily in real life, IRL, but you can still have that connection, right? Talk for a second about how Modus and Avocor, but also technology-wise, we can leverage some of these technologies to still connect each other virtually, right? Still have that human interaction to help, whether that's in, managing employees, encouraging folks, mentorship. Talk for a second about how, as we kind of come together in these meeting rooms, again, whether it's physically in person or virtually, how we can still maintain those interactions.
It's interesting, right? So Tim and Dana both, we have never interacted in real life. I've never had an opportunity to shake either of your hands. Yet at the same time, I like both of you. We have good rapport. I've gotten to know both of you quite a bit over the last year or so. And so I think, as with everything else, there's a balance there, right? Every layer of communication we add helps build relationships. If we're communicating strictly over text, that's a little bit, once we have some nonverbal communication, we can see each other, we can hear inflection in the way we're speaking, that all starts to build up to getting closer to a real life interaction. On the VR side, it's really interesting. You have a floating headset and 2 controllers, right? You don't even see facial expression or anything, but seeing how somebody emotes just with body language is shockingly, it's shocking how much comes through in terms of personality, which really surprised us. So I think we're seeing just a lot of opportunities for people to build relationships in different ways than we're used to. I don't think anything will ever fully replace physical interaction, right? Being able to shake somebody's hand and look them directly in the eye rather than kind of look at the screen and bounce between your camera and the screen. Yeah. But it's close, right? And sometimes being able to get close is good enough because of the other benefits that it brings in, right? If you have a 2.5-hour commute to and from work, there's a cost there, and maybe it's worth it to sacrifice the in-person stuff once in a while to be able to spend more time with family or to be able to go get your tires rotated, right? I mean, there's a balance to be found, and I think we're seeing the value of that with the unfortunate opportunity we've had from the pandemic.
Well, absolutely, and there's also something. I mean, there is. There's a balance here because I mentioned the fact that I now go over to St. Louis twice a week at least. I've said this on several different occasions. I have found there is a disconnect when I leave that office. When I leave CTI's corporate headquarters and I get in my car, I've got about a 35, 45-minute drive depending on St. Louis traffic, and St. Louis is nowhere near LA or New York, so I have it easy. Don't misunderstand. But there's a disconnect there, right? I can listen to a podcast. I can listen to nothing, right? But it's me in my car, right? There's a decompression there that happens. Mm-hmm. I'm not taking my work home. And there are certainly days and occasions when I do work the weekends and nights. That does happen. But there's a benefit there of going into an office and then, again, this is me personally, though. This mm-hmm. is my personal preference, my personal experience. I think that's one of the things that some corporations have a danger of losing sight of is what does it work for each individual employee or your culture, right? Before we started recording, Dana mentioned the fact that people are beating up Apple for we're going back to work, we're going back to the office. That works for their culture, right? That's their culture, right? Whether you loved him or hate him, one of the most popular stories about Steve Jobs was the fact that he walked around the office and to see what people were working on and would give them feedback. You cannot do that. You can't do the whole pop-in virtually. Yes, there's a way to do that, but there's also a side of this that says there's some natural serendipitous things that happen, right? So, as we wrap up here, I want to make sure that I understand and get each of your takes on this. Dana, we'll start with you on this. What does it mean now that Ken and his team have started bringing in some of these commercial things and start working with products like Avocor and leveraging some of that VR technology for meetings, but also for other applications in commercial spaces?
Yeah, no, I think the timing is fantastic, really, because I think you have this real challenge in corporate right now, corporate America, just corporate in general, of spatial planning. How do I handle the hybrid spaces? How do I move things around? How do I balance today's needs with tomorrow's? Can I visualize these things? And also what's so powerful about Modus is the ability to see the technology layer itself within the space spatially. Like, what does the camera view angle look like? What does it look like from the camera? How does the panels look in the room? What's the right size? I mean, these are all things that you have to draw up and try to get the client to conceptualize, when in reality you can just actually literally take them through it and virtually walk them through the room. And it's great. I mean, that's the power of it. I think the timing of them coming into it is like I said, wonderful. And for us, it's being part of that solution. We are just a piece within the pie, and we get to be shown in a way that shows the benefits in that spatial place. And that makes it exciting because, we did a webinar with Salamander and Logitech with Modus, which was great. And it just really allowed us to all show the technology, but in a way that delivers, the space in a meaningful way. It's really, really good.
There's an old adage in architecture that it's a lot cheaper and easier to remove a wall with an eraser than it is with a bulldozer, right? And the same thing here, Ken, and I want you to comment as well as on Dana's side, on Modus' side rather. What does this mean for integrators? What does it mean for the folks that are designing these systems to be able to take their clients through a new space, or even how they're able to leverage their existing spaces to make it more hybrid friendly, but also more health conscious as well?
Yeah, I mean the challenge I see here is much greater than just a technology challenge. If a company is really looking at transitioning to support a hybrid workforce, they are potentially changing their entire culture.
Yeah.
And that's not a decision you take lightly. That's quite possibly the most important thing you could be looking at changing or screwing up, right? And so when you have so much at stake, there tends to be a little bit of decision paralysis. And we're seeing, statistically speaking, still over half the companies either haven't made a decision or haven't communicated their return to office plans. Yeah. And there's just so many variables to think about, many of which are things they've never even considered before. And so to have an executive sitting in an office trying to imagine the day-to-day reinvention of their workforce is an unfair thing to ask them to do. They're just not equipped to do that. And so when you have a tool like Modus, for example, that lets you try things out, a lot of problems come to the forefront that you wouldn't necessarily think about. And I'll use Avocor as a wonderful example of this, because Avocor is the only interactive touchscreen we've added to Modus so far. And going into it, I didn't fully appreciate the benefits of having it in Modus. But once we had it there, especially working with Dana and his team, we would start designing a room and we'd put a touchscreen somewhere and we'd realize, oh my goodness, we just put this touchscreen where a normal display typically was, but there's an 18-inch deep cabinet underneath it. I can't reach it very well. Or this display isn't at the right height because now it's awkward to reach the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen. Or now as I'm interacting with the screen, I'm blocking a camera, right? All of these things that I'm sure are obvious to Dana because this is his world were not obvious to me. And it's not going to be obvious to a lot of the integrators either. And that's the power of being able to just see what you're doing and be in that environment. You get that spatial understanding that you only get either in VR or actually building it out in real life. And so that's where I see this being such a big piece, and where it's been so eye-opening to have Avocor in there, because it's made me rethink and appreciate so many of these challenges for what they really are.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I will most likely be seeing both of you in real life. We mentioned that. Probably in the next 6 months as AVNation heads to both CEDIA and to Infocom. So I hope to see you both there. Dana Corey from Avocor, how do people connect with you or Avocor, sir?
We're at avocor.com, and if you want to email me, it's dana.corey@avocor.com as well. So,
all right, very good. Mr. Ken, thank you, sir. How do people connect with you or Modus?
Yeah, just modusvr.com. That's MODUS VR.com. And my email is ken@modusvr.com.
All right, very good. Thank you both so much. For us, for AVNation, go by our website, avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv. You'll find programs like this and a host of others. Since we're talking about both resi and commercial here, go watch my buddy Matt Scott's weekly show called Resi Week that looks at the residential side, and mine, AV Week, that looks at the commercial side. So all that and more at avnation.tv, avnation.tv.